They didn't know who they had just pulled over. It was a still, humid evening in Orlando. The sun had only recently dipped below the horizon, but the heat clung to the city like a wet sheet. The roads, slick from an earlier drizzle, reflected the faint shimmer of traffic lights. At a quiet intersection, a sleek black SUV turned left, its movement fluid, smooth, unhurried. Nothing about the vehicle screamed urgency or suspicion. It obeyed every traffic law, signaled properly, moved at the correct speed. Still, as it passed a patrol car parked near the sidewalk, two officers inside exchanged a look. "You see that?" the younger officer asked, sitting up straighter. "Yeah," his partner replied. Already starting the engine. No sirens at first. They tailed the vehicle silently for a few blocks. Then, with a sudden flick of switches, red and blue lights filled the air, dancing wildly across the SUV's tinted windows. The woman inside the vehicle didn't panic. She simply pulled over to the side of the road, her motions deliberate and calm. She put the car in park, lowered the window, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel. Her face betrayed no emotion, only a tired sort of patience, the kind earned from years of being black in America and understanding exactly how these encounters could go outside. Officer Miller adjusted his utility belt as he approached the driver's side, while his partner, Officer Harris, moved to the passenger side, peering in through the back window. Their steps were cautious, measured. They hadn't run lights because of a traffic violation, because there wasn't one. Didn't have a real reason. Didn't expect anyone to question it. "Evening," Officer Miller said, leaning slightly toward the window. "License and registration, please." The woman nodded once, wordlessly. She opened the glove compartment with one hand and retrieved her paperwork, and reached into her purse and took out her ID. He accepted it without much thought, only glancing briefly before starting to walk back to the cruiser, and then he paused. He looked again. The name hit him first, then the title. He stopped in his tracks. He turned around slowly and looked at her again, this time seeing her. She watched him with unwavering eyes. "Ma'am," he began, walking back. His tone had changed. He was less certain, a bit more guarded. "I'm curious," she said before he could speak. Her voice was low, calm, but firm. "Why did you stop me?" Officer Harris walked over quickly to join them, sensing something had shifted. Just a routine stop," Officer Miller said. "Routine?" she asked, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "Because nothing about what I was doing broke any traffic?" "Laws. Your plates didn't come up in our system," Harris offered, trying to sound helpful. "Could be a glitch." "A glitch," she repeated slowly. There was a long pause. Her eyes flicked to each of them. She wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. She was watching, calculating, measuring them as they had measured her. Miller looked down at the ID again. Her face was on it. Her full name, her title, State Attorney, 9th Judicial Circuit of Florida. It felt like the words were glowing now, searing into his hand. He cleared his throat and tried to recover. "Well, we didn't recognize you," he said with a weak smile. "No reason you should," she replied. "You didn't ask." "Who I was before you decided to run my tags?" She leaned back slightly. "Tell me something, do you routinely run plates of random vehicles that haven't committed any traffic violations?" There was no answer. She continued, her tone still composed. "Do you often stop drivers because of a glitch? Or does that only happen when the driver looks like me?" Again, silence. A light breeze moved through the air. Not enough to cool the tension, just enough to stir it. She knew the game. She'd lived it before she ever earned her title. This wasn't her first stop, nor was it the first time she'd seen the hesitation, the over-explaining, the quiet shuffling of feet when authority got challenged by someone unexpected, and yet somehow it never got easier to stomach. "I'd like both of your names," she said finally, "and badge numbers." Officer Harris quickly provided his voice slightly strained. Miller followed suit, his confidence evaporating. She nodded and reached for her phone. Calmly, she began to record. "For transparency," she added, before either could object. "Ma'am." We're not trying to cause any trouble, Harris offered, holding up his hand slightly. Just doing our jobs, and you should have no issue with documentation, she said, eyes on the screen. They stood there, awkward and uncomfortable. The power dynamic completely reversed. This wasn't the person they expected behind the tinted glass of that SUV. They thought they were in control, that this would be another quick, unchallenged interaction. But the woman they had pulled over was no stranger to law, no stranger to bias, and certainly no stranger to standing her ground. In that moment, it became painfully clear that they weren't just dealing with a citizen, they were dealing with a symbol. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult them. She didn't threaten. She also didn't back down. Eventually, after a few moments of thick silence, she said, "If you have no further questions, I'd like to continue on my way." Officer Miller nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. You're free to go." She placed her ID back into her purse, started the engine, and eased back onto the road. The flashing lights faded behind her. In the cruiser, neither officer spoke for a long moment. Harris finally broke the silence. "We're going to hear about this," he said flatly. Miller only nodded, still staring at the road where her SUV disappeared. They hadn't written a ticket. They hadn't made an arrest, hadn't drawn weapons or raised voices. But what they had done was stop the wrong woman for the wrong reason. And now, it unknowingly ignited something much larger than a traffic stop. And the clock was ticking. One officer chuckled nervously. "Oh, wow. You're the state attorney. We didn't recognize you." "No reason you should," she replied coolly. Her tone didn't change. Her posture didn't shift. She sat behind the wheel like someone used to command, used to being underestimated, and knowing exactly what that meant. The silence that followed was like thick fog. It's the kind you couldn't see through, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Officer Miller glanced at his partner, Harris, who looked equally caught off guard. The glow of the patrol car's lights was still flashing, as if trying to hold on to some sense of control in a situation where it had already slipped away. "You ran my tags," she said, each word careful and pointed. "Why, it's just part of our routine," Miller said quickly, the words tumbling from his mouth. "Sometimes if a plate doesn't scan correctly, or what?" she asked. He blinked. Harris jumped in to assist. "Sometimes there are discrepancies in the system. Or if we suspect what?" She interrupted again, calm but unrelenting. "Because I sign off on hundreds of cases a year involving suspicion. I'm quite familiar with the term. I want to know what about my driving or my car led to yours." Neither officer could answer. Not honestly. Because there had been no reason, no broken law, no failed signal, no reckless turn. Just a black woman in a black SUV with tinted windows, driving through a city where such a combination often drew attention it shouldn't. "You didn't recognize me?" she said again, softly this time, more to herself. "And because you didn't, you assumed something. Assumptions that could have gone very differently if I were someone else." They knew that. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, they knew it. And she could see it on their faces, the dawning realization of how close they had come to stepping into something far more serious. "Ma'am, again, you weren't trying to what?" she asked. "Harass, intimidate, profile, or maybe just inconvenience someone? You thought couldn't do anything about it?" "We were just doing our jobs," Harris muttered, though the conviction in his voice was gone. It had dissolved under the weight of her presence. Her eyes locked onto his. "Now maybe it's time we redefine what your job is." There was a pause. Then, without another word, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. "And pen? What are you doing?" Miller asked, genuinely confused. "Taking notes," she said simply, "so I don't forget anything when I submit my report." Both officers visibly stiffened. "Report?" Harris repeated. "You stopped the state attorney of the 9th Judicial Circuit for no legal reason, ran her plates, asked for identification without probable cause, and then tried to pass it off as routine." "Yes," she said, scribbling something. "There will be a report." Miller scratched the back of his head. "Look, we understand who you are now. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "See, that's the problem. Now that you know who I am, you're calling it a misunderstanding. But had I been a school teacher, or a nurse, or a delivery driver, This wouldn't be a misunderstanding, would it? You'd be writing a citation? Maybe worse? She was right, and they knew it. What happens next? Harris asked, his voice quiet, almost defeated. I'm going to do what I've always done, she said, folding the notepad and sliding it into her bag. My job, which is holding systems accountable, including the ones wearing badges. A flicker of guilt flashed across Miller's face. For a moment, he looked less like a cop and more like a man trying to calculate how much damage had just been done not to his career, but to his conscience. Because deep down he knew this wasn't right. It hadn't been right the moment they decided to follow the SUV. I assume you both have body cams? She asked. They nodded. Double quotes, good. Make sure that footage doesn't mysteriously disappear. I will be requesting it in the morning. She pulled out her phone and opened the recording app again. Ma'am, is that necessary? Harris asked. It always is, she replied, tapping the screen. The red dot blinked, and she faced the officers again. State attorney pulled over. At 8:42 p.m. by Officers Miller and Harris. No traffic violation. Plates were valid. No reasonable suspicion articulated. Stop appears to be racially motivated. Officers are aware of my identity now and are visibly uncomfortable. No explanation. For the stop provided beyond the phrase routine, body cam footage will be requested. End recording. She hit the stop button and slid the phone into the center console. Miller spoke up, his voice dry. Look, we didn't mean any disrespect, but you did disrespect me, she said. Without saying a word, the moment you assumed something about me that wasn't true, that's the core issue here. It's not just what you said, it's why you felt you could say it. Neither of them responded. She studied them again. Not with hatred, not with bitterness, but with something colder disappointment. The kind. That leaves a mark deeper than anger. You know what bothers me most? She asked after a long silence. It's not the stop. It's that this probably isn't the first time you've done this. Miller opened his mouth but said nothing. And if I weren't who I am, she continued, it wouldn't be the last. The words hung in the air, thick as the night. She leaned back in her seat, took a slow breath, and looked at them both one more time. You're lucky, she said. That caught them off guard. Lucky? Harris asked. Yes, because I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I didn't reach into my bag too quickly. I didn't argue. I stayed calm. I knew how to survive this. You're lucky I've had to learn how to survive this. That silence. Again, but this time it was weighted with shame. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine purred to life. I'm leaving now, she said. Don't follow me. And she pulled back onto the road, her taillights disappearing into the night. The two officers stood there in silence. Miller finally said, We screwed up. Harris nodded slowly. Big time. But deep down, what scared them most wasn't the professional consequences. It was the mirror she'd held up to them. One that showed the kind of officers they'd become, and it was the fear that she wasn't the first. She was just the first. Who could fight back? The footage went viral. It started with a tweet. Just a short clip, 30 seconds, no dramatic music, and no added text. Just the state attorney's calm voice stating the facts, questioning the officers, and asserting her rights. Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands, then millions. People didn't need commentary. The moment spoke for itself. A high-ranking black official pulled over for no clear reason, asking quiet, devastating questions that peeled back layers of systemic rot. By morning, the local news stations had picked it up. By afternoon, it was on every major national outlet. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, the New York Times, all covering the same clip. And not just the clip, but the context behind it. Her identity, her position, her history. Florida's first black female state attorney, the irony was too sharp to ignore. A woman who had dedicated her career to justice, fairness, and accountability. Now being forced to confront the very system she worked with in this time, not in a courtroom, but on the side of the road under flashing lights. Comment sections were flooded. People were furious. Imagine if she wasn't the state attorney. She'd be another name and a hashtag. This is why we say the system is broken. She was calm, respectful, and still treated like a suspect. What chance do the rest of us have? Some tried to defend the officers, talking about routine checks, system glitches, overreactions. But those arguments didn't hold up when you watched the footage. No violation, no citation. Just a quiet stop that became explosive under the weight of centuries of injustice. The public pressure mounted. The city's police department released a statement within 48 hours, calling the encounter unfortunate and under review. But it was too late for damage control. The state attorney didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The video was already speaking louder than any press conference could. When she finally did step forward, she didn't come with anger. She came with purpose. "I have no interest in destroying anyone's career," she said in an interview. "But I have every interest in changing the system that allows this to happen over and over again, not just to me, but to people without my title, without my voice, without the shield of power." It was a moment that crackled with clarity. She didn't just want an apology. She wanted transformation. Within a week, she filed a formal request for the department's stop and search data. A month later, she pushed a proposal through her office, mandating independent reviews of traffic. Stops that didn't result in a citation or arrest, starting with her own case. Other attorneys general took notice. Then governors. Then civil rights organizations. A ripple had started, and it wasn't slowing down. In Tallahassee, lawmakers began talking about transparency laws tied to body cam usage. Across the state, precincts reviewed their policies around plate scanning and probable cause. Cities hundreds of miles away adopted new procedures for racial bias training, not because they were told to, but because the video had shown them what inaction looked like. But it wasn't just the institutions that were changing. In schools, Black students who rarely saw themselves represented in power watched the clip in classrooms and community centers. Girls leaned in when the state attorney spoke, taking in the tone, the poise, the quiet fire in her restraint. She wasn't just someone in charge, she was someone prepared. Prepared for that moment because she had always known it might come. Letters began arriving at her office by the dozens, then hundreds. Handwritten notes from students, single moms, community leaders, retired lawyers. Some said thank you. Some shared their own traffic stop stories, so many of them eerily similar. Some asked how to become like her. Others asked how to help her. She read every letter. One night, after midnight, she sat in her office with a stack of them on her desk. She was exhausted. The spotlight was relentless. Every news station wanted another interview. Political commentators debated her motives. Some questioned her professionalism, others lauded her bravery. But the letters, those grounded her. One from a 14-year-old girl in Miami stood out. "I didn't know people like me could talk like that to cops. You didn't yell, you didn't cry. You made them feel small just by being calm. I want to be a lawyer now." She read it twice. Then she cried. But even as she cried, she knew the work wasn't done. She didn't want to become a symbol people could point to and say, "See progress," and then move on. She didn't want her experience to be a news cycle. She wanted it to mean something, so she started something new. She founded an initiative called Streetlight, a legal advocacy and awareness campaign focused on traffic stops, body cam transparency, and public education. The name came from something her grandmother used to say: "Even a streetlight has power if it shines in the right place." Streetlight offered workshops, legal toolkits, and community panels. But it also gave something more powerful: language. It taught people what to say during stops, what questions to ask, what rights to assert, how to record, how to protect themselves with knowledge, not just fear. And soon, she wasn't the only one leading the conversation. Former public defenders joined the cause. So did professors, student groups, tech experts. One engineer developed an app based on her encounter, something that would auto-send GPS coordinates and begin recording instantly. When triggered by voice, all of it started with 30 seconds on the side of the road. As for officers Miller and Harris, the aftermath was quieter, but not without consequence. Both were removed from patrol duty pending the internal investigation. In public statements, neither denied the encounter, but both insisted it was never their intent to intimidate or discriminate. Whether that was true or just strategic was up for debate, but in private, something shifted for them. Miller, who had been with the force for nearly 10 years, found himself struggling to look his neighbors in the eye. His daughter came home from school one day and asked, "Why are people saying police are bad?" She had seen the clip. So had her friends. So had their teachers. That question stayed with him. He requested a leave of absence, and for the first time in his career, he attended a community panel, no uniform, no badge. It's just a man in the audience listening to voices that didn't sound like his own. It wasn't easy. He didn't speak, but he listened. Sometimes that's the beginning of change. The state attorney continued her work. She stayed in her position. She didn't use the incident to launch a campaign or write a book. Instead, she built something real layer by layer. With the same patience she showed that night on the roadside, she would later say that the stop taught her something no law school ever could. It taught me how small moments can reveal massive truths. How silence can say more than shouting. How sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask the right question and wait for the world to answer. And so, the world